Here today as one nation because we have a date with destiny. As you know, many dark forces have labored to prevent this election, but they have failed because no force on earth can stop the change that God has decreed for us. For 26 years, Malawi's wealth has been plundered, its institutions paralyzed, and its citizens impoverished by a toxic dynasty of two families. But God has given us another chance to choose change. That is destiny. For 26 years, Malawi's democracy has been hijacked by cheats whose hold on power is built on fraudulent elections, violent campaigns, tribal voting, and minority rule. But God has given us this fresh election to restore every voter's power to bring change and every voter's right to enjoy its fruits. That is destiny. Hallelujah. For 26 years, Malawi's vice presidents have been mistreated, underutilized, harassed, and slandered. But God has given us Dr. Chilima, whose courage has confronted this disease and answered the call to cure it on behalf of all Malawians. That is destiny. For 26 years, Malawi's political parties and leaders have forged enmities, and their followers have had disputes.
Hello, greetings to all our followers of United States of Africa. This is the African Broadcasting Agency. Now the outcome of Malawi elections, does it give us hope as Africans that democracy can work in Africa, that people can have some power to bring the change? In my opinion, I feel that if people come together, they are able to change the kind of leadership that they desire. As a Global Pan-Africanism Network and the United States of Africa, we congratulate the new elected president of Malawi, Dr. Lazarus Chakwera, and we hope that he's going to uphold Pan-Africanism principle in stopping the plunder of natural resources of Malawi people, so that these resources can begin to benefit the indigenous Malawians, because for a very long time, many African countries got independence, but they forgot about the economic independence. And we need to regain control of our natural resource. And I believe Pan-Africanism can really inspire a renewed spirit of change. We can be able to provide the kind of leadership and even influence change that Africa needs. Africa needs the kind of leadership that will respond to solving the problems that we are facing in Africa. For example, the issue of tribalism. We are having so many problems like diseases that are plaguing Africa. There are so many conflicts which date back to the Berlin Conference. For example, the GAD crisis is a problem that was created by the British when they came and they took the Nile by the hand. So after they left, we have seen Egypt inheriting those powers, and this has made it very difficult because for one country to have authority or power over water outside its borders is now bringing it making even the people who own the water unable to access the water. These are things that we need to discuss and come up with Pan-African solutions that enables that every country in Africa benefits from the Nile resources because Africans, they have lived in the Nile Valley for thousands of years, and they've been sharing this important common natural resource. And there are many other natural resources that we have in Africa. We have the ocean, the African Ocean, that we need to rename and also be able to share so that we don't have any landlocked country in Africa. It's greed that makes some countries take large chunks of oceans and then make other African countries landlocked. Yet we are one people, we are one nation. This is the time for Africa to demonstrate Pan-African unity and use Pan-Africanism to solve all these challenges that we are facing. In African customs, I said we don't fight over water because the moment you begin fighting over water, at the end of the day, usually floods come. And I've experienced it. I had an argument with my neighbors when I was farming. And then when I went to collect some water, they'd just shut down the streams and make sure that the water doesn't get to my farm. But after we escalated our conflict, then there was floods and there's a lot of water for everyone. So we don't need to fight over natural resources, something that we have not created. We need to utilize these natural resources for the benefit of Africa and embrace Pan-African principles that sees Africa as one people united by common destiny. As long as we don't embrace Pan-Africanism, then we are going to be having more problems every day. And tribalism must be eradicated so that we inspire a renewed spirit of African nationalism. We need to see ourselves as Africans, whether we are in Australia, we are in the Caribbean, whether we are in the United States, we are Africans and all belong to the African nation. And this has been the message of United States of Africa. It's my hope that many Africans will embrace Pan-African values. Let us protect our ancient culture, protect our indigenous languages, and more importantly, present ourselves as a new generation of leaders and decolonize our minds so that we don't keep on bringing people in who do not deliver. These poor leaders that do not serve our interests. We need to ensure that we protect our votes just like Malawi did. And when we go to the ballot, we vote for the right people who have Africa at heart, because these are the people that will represent our interest. But if we vote for people who will end up selling Africa to foreign nations, then we would be holding ourselves at ransom, and the future of Africa will be destroyed. So everything rises and falls on leadership. Without good leadership, there's no way that Africa can progress. So we really need to inspire a renewed struggle to change the kind of leadership that we have in Africa, so that we have African leaders that are very passionate about Africa, and they put the interests of the people first, as opposed to the kind of generation of leaders that we have that only care about their families, their personal interests. They care about what they leave to their families when they die, but they don't care how. They don't care if they destroy our nations and plunge Africa into debt. The kind of philosophy that African leaders have been operating on is that Africa cannot survive without foreign investors, and they prioritize these foreign investors over its own people. We need to invest in Africans because the moment we invest in the African people, we invest in ourselves, and these people are going to build Africa to reinvest what they have acquired back to the African soil. But if we continue relying on everything on foreign investors, these will just come and harvest all the wealth and go back to their foreign countries to continue developing their countries, while Africa will be lagging behind. We will just be reduced to consumers and providing labor to these foreign these foreign companies. So we need to think further and begin to develop our own economies that are self-reliant and do not depend on these foreign investors, so that we secure the interests of Africa and protect the economy of Africa from these external shocks that come when these foreign investors decide to pull out. We need an indigenous African economy that will stand for hundreds of years. And in order to do this, then we have to embrace Pan-Africanism approach in the ownership of natural resources and in the way we utilize these natural resources for our own benefit. Some you're saying a second victory for democracy in Africa. What is your take with what has been happening in South Africa about the outdated and unconstitutional electoral act? In regards to what happened in Malawi, this is indeed victory for Africa and victory for the African people, because this is the first time that the incumbent has lost to the opposition leader. And the same thing happened in Kenya. The elections were nullified, but somehow they found a way to manipulate the electoral system, and we ended up with the same result. So this shows that Malawi is way ahead and a perfect example for Africa. And in regards to the issues of South Africa, I cannot comment on what is happening at the moment, but South Africa has a very big challenge because many of these laws were created during the apartheid system, and these laws are the ones that define the property ownership. They define who will own land, and these these colonial laws have to be completely removed so that the native ownership lands rights are restored, and the indigenous South Africans are able to regain their lost land that is still under occupation. And you have, let me see, Chris saying, peace, brethren. Thank you very much for everyone who is joining this program. We are going to be carrying out several programs, and we'll invite all these members that had expressed interest in being guest at United States of Africa, so that we can exchange and share opinions. Thank you, Vanessa, for joining. Saying hello from United States. United States of Africa will continue to encourage Africans to wake up so that we begin electing the kind of leadership that we deserve. It's very important for us to know our power. The moment we know how powerful we are, when we concentrate this power and utilize it for to bring the kind of change that Africa needs, then we as an African nation will begin to develop. And if we begin developing politically and attaining political maturity, then we are going to stop electing leaders just because they give us little cash. And we will begin electing leaders that have a vision, leaders that are passionate about Africa, and they are ready to empower the African people. That's the kind of Africa that we want, not electing leaders because they give you some change. When you elect such kind of leaders, they'll never serve your interests. They'll end up serving the interests of those foreign investors that gave them money for campaign. And this kind of money ended up to you as handouts. Gita, you're saying, I think democracy is a must for all Africans. It may delay, but to achieve it, it is due to all African youth. We are here, and Malawi should serve as a model. I agree with you, brother. Sometimes democracy usually delays in Africa because of the kind of tyrant leadership that exists in many African countries. And the second thing is because most of the time the military is not loyal to the people and the constitution. They are used to rig elections, and the state agencies. That's why you find out that someone will win elections and then they'll be rigged, and then we end up getting the same kind of result, the old leaders being recycled back. And to change this kind of cycle, we need to stand for Africa, inspire a new generation of young people who are politically mature, and they'll be electing their leaders without looking at who's giving them handouts. And at the same time, it's also an open challenge for young people to express their ambitions and pursue them. The presidency of Africa is not a privilege for all generation. We need to see young people standing up and saying, I want to run for presidency. I'm gonna be president. And if we start seeing young people stand with a lot of confidence, we as Pan Africanists are going to support any young people that will stand up and say they want to run for presidency. And we will utilize our network to promote that agenda, to inspire young people to run for presidency. We have one of our members who will be running for presidency in Ghana. She's also our host for many programs that we have been running. And she's also the ambassador for Japan UK. And very soon we are going to bring her on United States of Africa so that she can tell us about her vision for Ghana as a president. And we also need more people, more Pan-Africanists to run for presidency, because it's very important for us to start holding the grip on power. Let us not wait for these people to get too old until they don't want to leave power voluntarily. We young people coming together and utilizing our voting power, we can empower young people and vote them in as presidents, as members of parliament, and through that we are going to inspire the kind of change that Africa needs, because Africa has a lot of resources, but what we don't have is the kind of leaders that are ready to utilize these resources for the development of the African people. And you see that in many African governments, the development of the African people comes as a secondary consideration. First of all, they'll tell you about building the infrastructure, the roads that their cars travel on, the railways that their goods are going to be transported on. But when you tell them about empowering the people directly and developing people economically so that they can reach their full potential, you don't see African governments investing in the people. This is why you see Africans are still fleeing to the Middle East, in spite of the long history of slavery in the Middle East and mistreatment of Africans, discrimination of Africans. We are still seeing Africans flocking into the Middle East. More Africans are flocking into Libya every day, in spite of the fact that people are being sold there as slaves. So we really need the kind of leadership that will invest in the African people. Vanessa, you are saying we need our ancestors' help like yesterday. I saw an army of falcons yesterday. Certainly, if we are able to come together and utilize our unity for self-development, I believe that we as a people will begin to see the kind of change that we have been looking for, the kind of change that we have been asking, and the African people have been trying to ask for a very long time. They've been waiting to see the kind of leadership that will work towards poverty eradication, that will promote African values, African culture, and inspire Africans to be proud of who they are, to be proud of their identity. That's the kind of leadership that Africa needs, leadership that embraces Pan-African principles and prioritizes economic development of indigenous Africans, and ensures that the natural resources of Africa are controlled by native Africans. If we are able to control over 90% of our natural resources, then Africa is going to develop within no time. But because there are no laws protecting our natural resources, most of the resources are being controlled by these foreign multinational companies, and Africa is losing trillions of dollars because of this wealth that is being taken away. So the only way is to ensure that we have a unified African government and come up with a policy that ensures that over 90% of natural resources can never change hands from native Africans to non-Africans. If we are able to maintain and control 90% of our natural resources, then we don't need any aid from anyone. Africa will be able to develop itself. Kaya, you are saying most leaders emerges from their political parties who keep electing old people. In such political parties, if they elect someone 40 years, that person is considered young. How to change that within local politics, then extend to the rest of Africa? To change that, we need to establish political parties that are led by young people. And if we have these political parties, the new generation of political leaders will begin to emerge. And that is how young people can rise to power. by having their own political parties. We should not just wait to join these old political parties. Start by creating your own political party and then use it as a vehicle to empower young people and promote youth leadership. Because these old political parties have a tendency to appoint the lineage of families that benefited from colonialism. Those came into power after the end of colonialism in Africa. In many countries, you're seeing that power is still circulating within those privileged elites that were the first to take power during the independence of Africa. And to change this, then we need to have our own political parties that push for our own interests, ensuring that we have youthful leadership, and we find ways to support candidates. By doing this, then we are going to begin to see massive interest in leadership by young people, and that will be very important. Noreen, you're saying the judicial system in Malawi has showed Africa how democracy should be. I'm proud today to call myself a Malawian, a new Malawi. Our new leader is young. Certainly, if judiciary is independent, if it's not manipulated, then it can be the only source of justice for the people. And I congratulate the Malawi judicial system because it has proven to be impartial. It has proven to deliver justice to the people. And this is the kind of judiciary that Africa needs in every African country. In Kenya, we have a challenge where the executive is fighting power with the judiciary, trying to even stop the appointment of judges. And this is why you find out in Kenya's example, even after judiciary annulled the election results, there was still some computer games that were played, and Kenyans ended up with the same result. But I'm glad that the same thing did not happen in Malawi. The judiciary system has proven to be very reliable. They have delivered justice to the people, and even the Malawian military has protected the voice of the people. This is what all other African militaries need to embrace the African nationalism, to protect the voice of the people, so that we don't have wicked leaders in power. If we have security systems in Africa protect free and fair elections, then there'll be no one who will be rigging elections, and we'll have a generation of leaders that really care about the interests of the people, and not the kind of leaders who are just there to continue protecting the ill-gotten wealth. Vanessa, you're saying our government is controlled by demonic forces. Once we realize this, we can build our nation back. Here in America, need 75% segregation in our nation. Here as well, our government start a political party. Certainly, in the United States, there's need for Black community to have a political party that represents people of African descent, because neither Republican, neither the Democrats represents the interest of the African people or the African Americans. Without having your own political party, you're open to serving their interests. and they'll just use the black voters. Once they get what they want, they'll just forget about you. So just as Malcolm X said, we need political maturity. And when we go for elections, we need to elect a leader of our own community. And as long as you continue electing a leader outside your community, it's going to be very difficult for him or her to serve your interests. And that is where the African Americans have failed. They have continued electing leaders out of their communities, hoping that these leaders will be merciful and will end up serving their interests. But the sure way to ensure that Black people in America regain their power and are respected is for the African Americans to have their own political parties, to have their own candidates, and that is how we can begin bargaining power. If we already have our own power and we have political parties, we have our own candidates that we are supporting. It's very easy for Black people to build power when they concentrate it. And the issue of having so many Black organizations, and we have a situation where one Black organization is trying to outshine the other Black organizations, saying I'm better than any other civil rights organizations. I'm better than other Black organizations. That kind of divide and rule strategy will never help us. This is why Global Pan Africanism Network encourages all Black organizations to join us and be part of one network that is working towards Black liberation and total unification of Africa. Because if we begin fighting amongst ourselves and trying to say, oh, this maybe GPAN is better than Black Lives Matter, or Black Lives Matter is better than is better than whichever organization. If we begin competing among ourselves, then we'll never attain anything, and we'll never get where we want. So we need to bring all these organizations together. I know that each organization has its own capacities and capabilities. There are organizations that are good in activism. Some are good in implementing projects on the ground, in coming up with solutions. And GPAN approach is not telling people to go out and protest. We are telling people to come down, to come together. Let us sit down and see what we can do to change what we dislike in our communities. If we are worried about safety and security of our people, then we have to sit down and find ways in which we can end the killings of the African Americans and create a system that protects us. And that's the kind of thinking that GPAN that GPAN is seeking, and is seeking to ensure that many African Americans embrace this kind of attitude, because as long as we continue getting paranoid about everything that is happening and just being on the reactive scale, we will never be able to be proactive. We'll let the things happen and then we go out and protest. But proactive leadership prevents further problems from coming into our communities and find solutions to these problems. Richard Atumia saying, greetings, what are your hopes for your newly elected president? We are very hopeful that the new president of Malawi will hold true to his words and he is going to embrace Pan-Africanism principles, put the interest of Malawian people first, because if we have more leaders that put the interests of the African people first, we'll see people rising. And if people begin developing, then we have a new Africa that is ready to take on its own challenges and stand on its 2 feet. Jabe, you're saying, and bring peace in the continent of Africa. Certainly, this is our vision of United States of Africa, to promote peace and at the same time to promote true knowledge of the African history. If we know the history, then we'll be able to know the origin of these problems that we are facing, and it will be very easy for us to find solutions to these problems. Thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to having another live interactions, and we'll invite more guests so that we can have a discussion and include different views. At the same time, very soon we are going to have a discussion on the Nile, on the River Nile, and this discussion will ensure that we have a clear understanding of the GAD crisis, and we'll also unlock the origin of the crisis, which is learning about the history, being able to narrate the history of how this crisis began. It all began in the Berlin Conference, and the first thing, as I said, when the British came, they made sure that they took the Nile by the hand. So I hope that you'll stay tuned to the United States of Africa and the African Broadcasting Agency, so that you get involved in the next discussion that we'll have live here from Nairobi studio. Have a good night and good day wherever you are.